On March 20th, 2020, China Eastern Flight 564 took off from Indira Gandhi International Airport in New Delhi. 5 hours and 24 minutes later, it landed uneventfully in Shanghai, just as it had 2 days earlier and 5 days before that. But what none of the 200 passengers on board that Airbus A330 knew, indeed what no one could have known, is that this would be the last flight between the two countries in 2020, in 2021, in 2022, in 2023, and so far, 2024. As of September 6th, not a single scheduled commercial passenger plane has flown directly between India and mainland China for 1,631 days. That's nearly 4.5 years, half a decade. Needless to say, this degree of isolation is virtually unheard of in the 21st century, particularly between the two most populous nations on Earth. Of the 32 countries and territories within a 3,000-mile radius of Beijing, 29 have at least one direct flight to China, including Afghanistan, Brunei, Taiwan, and even North Korea. The three exceptions are Palau, a 300-island archipelago in the Pacific with just 18,000 people, the tiny kingdom of Bhutan, so sparsely populated that it has not a single traffic light in the entire country, and, conspicuously, India, home to nearly as many people as all the other 31 put together. With 1.417 and 1.412 billion people respectively, India and China are together home to 1/3 of humanity. They should, in other words, make for frequent and profitable flights. And indeed, they did. In December 2019, there were 539. After all, there's really no other option. The Chinese city of Lhasa, for example, lies just 200 miles northeast of Sikkim, India. Yet getting there by car would require a 120-hour, 4,000-mile detour through Myanmar, Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam, thanks to a little something called Mount Everest. The steep, inhospitable Tibetan Plateau, with its 20,000-plus foot mountains, makes any form of land travel nearly impossible. Flying, by contrast, takes about 5 hours between Delhi and Shanghai. Or rather, it did. Today, the fastest journey takes twice as long and requires a layover in Hong Kong. As you can probably guess, this unprecedented state of affairs began with an unprecedented pandemic. In March 2020, both India and China banned virtually all international arrivals. But 2 years later, India resumed regular travel. A year after that, China did the same. Yet still, no flights between them. And that's because of what happened here, back in the summer of 2020. But first, some quick background. This is modern-day China. This is India. And these are the countries of Bangladesh, Bhutan, and Nepal. China and India share the longest disputed border in the world. It's split into 3 sections. First, the eastern one. In 1914, representatives from India, then ruled by Britain, China, then ruled by the Republic of China, and Tibet, then a de facto independent nation before China seized control in 1950, met to discuss the latter's status. Tibet and British India then agreed on this line as their eastern border, which the Republic of India still maintains to this day. China, however, never recognized the sovereignty of Tibet. The Tibetan government, it maintains, never had the right to sign that 1914 agreement. Therefore, the border is invalid. Moreover, it considers treaties like this one to be unequal and unfair abuses of imperialist power, in this case by Great Britain. For cultural and historical reasons, it says, the actual line is way down here. It calls this area, which is currently controlled by India, quote, South Tibet. Next is this middle section, the shortest and least contentious. China claims a small 34 square mile sliver of land here, which overlaps with claims made by Bhutan, an independent country with extremely close ties to India. Though it may be geographically trivial, this area is strategically significant because of its proximity to the Siliguri Corridor, also known as the Chicken's Neck, a choke point just 14 miles across at its shortest point, which connects India's northeast to the rest of the country. Finally, and most hotly contested, is the western section. Here, India claims this vast area controlled by China called Aksai Chin. Although twice the size of New Jersey, the great irony is that this 15,000 square mile region, like much of their disputed border, is among the least useful land on the planet. Its dry desert climate means almost no water, and its high elevation means almost no air, making it virtually worthless in every conceivable way. Except one, strategically. A road through Aksai Chin connects the Chinese provinces of Xinjiang and Tibet. It also enables China to quickly reinforce its border. Thus, land that no one bothered to settle for thousands of years has become some of the most sought after. In 1962, China launched a brief but deadly war, here and elsewhere along the border, killing or wounding thousands of Indian soldiers. Today, both sides acknowledge an informal line of actual control, LAC, an unsanctioned, temporary, and mutually disliked boundary placeholder. The only problem is that they disagree on where it is. Not only is there no demilitarized buffer zone, a no-man's land that would physically separate their armies and deter conflict, as on the Korean peninsula, but there are areas where the two interpretations of the LAC overlap. And because there exists a certain use it or lose it mentality, both sides feel the need to actively occupy and patrol these disputed regions to assert their respective claims, virtually guaranteeing conflict between the two nuclear powers. Far from kicking the can down the road indefinitely, as in the Korean DMZ, this makeshift solution actually escalates tensions. It's only a matter of time before a Chinese and an Indian patrol encounter one another in one of these overlapping regions. And that's exactly what happened in the summer of 2020. On June 15th, after weeks of rising tensions, Indian soldiers entered this disputed area in the Galwan Valley, on the western section of their border, to verify whether Chinese soldiers had withdrawn, as previously agreed upon. There, they discovered and began destroying a Chinese-built structure. Exactly what happened next is unclear, but we know that fighting soon broke out between Indian and Chinese soldiers. Because of a 1996 agreement not to fire guns or explosives, this involved Stone Age weapons like rocks, sticks, and makeshift clubs. And while this was far from their first physical encounter, it was the first in 45 years to turn deadly. Tragically, 20 Indian and a suspected 35 to 43 Chinese soldiers were killed. Both sides accused the other of provoking the incident by altering the status quo. India argues that it all began with China building aggressively in territory it had not previously occupied, including on India's side of the LAC. China, meanwhile, claims this construction was merely a reaction to India first building on China's side of the LAC, which would have granted it a new tactical advantage. India claims the confrontation was planned by Beijing. China says it was spontaneous and accidental. Whatever the circumstances, the fallout was severe. Now, this Sino-Indian relationship has always been somewhat acrimonious. Pakistan is one of China's closest allies, and one of India's most bitter enemies. In 1959, the 14th and current Dalai Lama fled from Chinese-occupied Tibet to Dharamshala, India, where he has since remained as a refugee under the state's protection. More recently, India has accused China of encroaching on its regional sphere of influence in places like the Maldives, Sri Lanka, and Nepal. Still, there were occasional moments over the past 60-odd years when real progress seemed possible. In fact, one of these moments came just 8 months before the tragedy in 2020, when Xi and Modi met in person, promising to take their relationship to greater heights the following year. Beneath this enduring optimism was the basic recognition that if they could somehow set aside their differences, India and China would be an economic force to be reckoned with. China, of course, is famous for its large-scale, low-cost manufacturing. Its rare combination of extensive infrastructure, entrepreneurial local governments, and large supplies of vulnerable, non-unionized labor conspire to create an unmatched scale, speed, and concentration of production. Meanwhile, nearly every major multinational corporation has outsourced some portion of its tech support, programming, or engineering to Bangalore. China has the hardware, and India the software. But alas, this was not to be. For an already skeptical New Delhi, the 2020 incident was the final straw, a decisive turning point from which there has been, 4.5 years later, no going back. Beijing, it became convinced, was committed to asserting its strength abroad. Drained of all hope it once had, India began retaliating. And the easiest targets were Chinese companies. Each year, India imports $120 billion worth of Chinese goods, more than it does from any other country, and nearly 3 times as much as the United States. Yet, despite being a much larger economy, China only imports 15% as much from India, an imbalance that became a liability. The Indian government banned hundreds of Chinese apps, including TikTok, imposed new rules and restrictions on Chinese companies, banned Huawei from its networks, and began investigating Chinese firms for alleged tax violations. Another easy target were travelers. India has made it nearly impossible for Chinese citizens to apply for visas. First, unlike the vast majority of the world, they can't apply online. In fact, they must do so in China, even if they live abroad. They're only told the exact requirements after applying, and these requirements often change. Unsurprisingly, nearly all applications are rejected. According to one recent estimate, a mere 2,000 visas have been granted to Chinese nationals so far this year, down from 200,000 in 2019. And because they've also stopped renewing each other's journalist visas, it's quite likely that there are currently 0 Indian journalists left in China, and vice versa. Now, ordinarily, after 4 long years of hostility, both countries might be eager to restore some diplomatic momentum. And a natural place to start building trust would be to resume flights. But since the 2020 hostilities, China has fortified its border, building new bridges and structures that would enable it to move and house up to 120,000 soldiers in Aksai Chin. In other words, China has since gained a strategic military advantage. Thus, while Beijing is keen to move on, thereby legitimizing, solidifying, and securing tacit acceptance of its advances, New Delhi views this as a concession and sees the broader relationship as leverage. China would prefer to first resume flights and then discuss their border. India would prefer to first discuss their border and then resume flights. There's also been a quiet shift over the past few years in their relative economic trajectories. China was once synonymous with boundless, spectacular growth. But its economy is now growing more slowly, and its consumers are spending far less. This is particularly acute in terms of travel. Since 2019, the number of flights to the US and Canada are down 63%, to France 57%, and to Taiwan 70%. It doesn't help that many countries are now banned from Russian airspace. turning, for example, a British Airways flight between Beijing and London from 10 to 13 hours. Between 2019 and 2023, China's Beijing Capital Airport fell from the second busiest in the world down to 23rd. Meanwhile, India is in the midst of a travel boom. Over that same period, Indira Gandhi Airport climbed from 16th to 10th place. Since 2014, India has doubled its number of airports, from just 74 to 148. And just look at this explosion of investment in rail and road infrastructure. Now, in absolute terms, the Indian economy still pales in comparison to the Chinese one. To put these numbers in perspective, United Airlines alone currently flies more aircraft than every Indian airline put together. But in terms of momentum, China is quickly losing it, while India is gaining speed. In the 1980s and 90s, it was China's potential as much as its reality that drew foreign investment, created excitement, and sustained the narrative of its meteoric rise. Today, it's India's turn to shine. In 2022, its population, still growing, passed China's, which is now shrinking. India can't build fast enough. Last year, one of its airlines placed an order for 500 Airbus A320s, the largest purchase in commercial aviation history. And yet, just 3% of the country's population has ever flown on an airplane. In other words, there's still an incredible supply of untapped growth. All of this is to say, Beijing feels a newfound sense of urgency. It's eager to get its economy back on track, resume normal travel, and stabilize its relationship with India. New Delhi, on the other hand, is in no such hurry. The result is a half-decade stalemate. Sadly, even if they do restore ties tomorrow, a real possibility, sooner or later Chinese and Indian troops will meet again at their border. And when they do, escalation may prove even harder to prevent than before. Several months after the June 2020 confrontation, both countries accused each other of firing warning shots, a clear violation of their previous agreement. Even what few rules and restraints kept a very tenuous peace in years past have since eroded, leaving them dangerously vulnerable to conflict. If and when they do achieve a true diplomatic breakthrough, it will require a great deal of creative thinking and problem solving, of the kind Brilliant, today's sponsor, cultivates with its interactive lessons, built from first principles, on topics like algorithms, probability, and logic puzzles. Brilliant understands that in the fast-changing world we now live in, no single programming language, topic, or skill is safe from disruption. Instead, the only true, timeless, and sustainable advantages are higher-level ways of thinking, problem-solving, flexibility, and consistency, all things that Brilliant can help you master. Brilliant's lessons are designed around a basic idea, that how you learn something is just as important as what you learn. You're more likely to keep returning day after day when you actually enjoy what you're learning. Imagine that. And you're more likely to remember and use what you learn when someone explains why you're learning it, rather than just feeding you formulas or facts to memorize. Brilliant guides you through the material step by step, with beautifully made and engaging interactive puzzles, interspersed with real projects and challenges that teach you how to analyze, think through, and solve a problem. You don't learn mathematical formulas. You build a recommendation algorithm for Spotify and learn some formulas along the way. To check out Brilliant completely free for 30 days, click the link on screen now or in the description below. That's brilliant.org/polymatter. Doing so will also get you 20% off an annual premium subscription. Go pick what interests you most and start learning today.